In the middle of my backyard, sparkling under the sun and reflecting every color imaginable, was my pride and joy, a custom-built pool that wrapped around a natural stone waterfall cascading down from a raised platform, turning my ordinary suburban yard into a resort-level paradise. That paradise lasted exactly 4 days before the HOA president, a man who had apparently never experienced joy in his entire life, showed up at my gate holding a clipboard and a violation notice so thick it could have been used as a doorstop. He did not ring the doorbell or even attempt polite conversation. He stood there, sunglasses reflecting the shimmer of the waterfall, lips pursed so tight they practically disappeared into his face. Water features of this size and nature are strictly prohibited under Section 9.3 of the Community Guidelines, he announced as if he were reading me my rights before a suburban arrest. I blinked at him, still drying off from my morning swim, and asked how a waterfall, located entirely within my enclosed backyard, invisible from the street, could possibly fall under HOA jurisdiction. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he produced his sacred HOA binder, flipping aggressively until he landed on a page that looked like it had been photocopied in the 1980s. Backyard modifications exceeding 3 feet in height, generating continuous noise, or incorporating non-standard landscaping elements must receive prior approval from the Architectural Committee, he said, stabbing at the paper with his finger. I pointed out that the waterfall had been professionally installed, made entirely from natural stone, and that the sound it generated was nothing more than a relaxing trickle, a sound my own neighbors had already told me they loved. That's when he switched tactics. Whether your neighbors approve or not is irrelevant, he declared. The only opinions that matter are those of the committee. I asked, very calmly, who exactly made up this so-called committee. He smiled a smile that belonged in a horror movie and said, the board members, myself included. The same man who was threatening me was also the one in charge of granting permission. Permission I already knew would never come. He handed me the notice, officially ordering me to cease use and dismantle the unapproved water feature within 72 hours, or face escalating fines of $200 per day, eventual suspension of community privileges, and legal action if I failed to comply. I folded the notice into a perfect square and tossed it directly into my recycling bin, all while maintaining eye contact. See you in court, I guess, I said. What the HOA president didn't know, or perhaps had forgotten, was that I had already hosted 2 pool parties since the waterfall's installation, and nearly every family on the street had shown up to swim under it. The kids called it the waterfall cave, since the stone overhang created a small shaded nook beneath the falling water, and the parents had spent both parties lounging beside it, sipping drinks and declaring it the nicest pool in the neighborhood. That night, I started getting texts from neighbors who had seen the HOA patrol at my gate, asking what was going on. When I told them about the violation, the responses came fast and furious. They can't be serious, that waterfall is amazing, my kid won't stop talking about swimming under it. By the next morning, one of my neighbors had created a new group chat called Save the Falls, inviting everyone on the street except the HOA board. The messages poured in, people offering to write letters, send emails, and even attend the next HOA meeting in protest if needed. It became crystal clear that this wasn't just my fight. The waterfall had become a neighborhood treasure, something that actually brought people together, something that made the block feel alive and welcoming instead of bland and restrictive. But to the HOA, it was an unapproved threat to uniformity, an unacceptable deviation from their beloved beige world of standard fences and regulation pavers. They wanted it gone. The neighbors wanted it to stay. And me? I wanted to make sure that if this turned into a battle, the HOA wouldn't just lose, they would drown in their own ridiculousness. The HOA must have realized I wasn't going to quietly dismantle my beautiful waterfall just because they said so, because the very next day, they escalated from threats to full-blown propaganda. By 7 a.m., the entire neighborhood email list received a message titled Urgent Community Notice. Unapproved water hazard jeopardizes property values. In it, the HOA described my waterfall like it was some kind of backyard apocalypse, claiming the constant noise disrupted neighborhood tranquility, the height violated visual aesthetic standards, and the water itself created a mosquito breeding ground that endangered public health. They attached a blurry photo of the waterfall, taken from what I could only assume was a step stool someone dragged to the fence line, making the peaceful cascade look ominous, like a suburban monsoon about to flood the entire block. They even warned that allowing unregulated aquatic installations would open the door for other homeowners to install fountains, ponds, or even artificial beaches, and that soon, the neighborhood would lose its cohesive character entirely. I couldn't believe it. They made my personal, self-funded, fully permitted waterfall sound like it was the opening act to the downfall of civilization. The problem for the HOA, though, was simple. My neighbors had already been to the pool parties. They had sat beside the waterfall, leaned against its rocks, listened to the soft trickle of water mixing with the sound of their kids laughing, and not a single one of them had ever complained. By lunchtime, the Save the Falls group chat was buzzing with outrage and memes. One of my neighbors photoshopped a picture of my waterfall onto the cover of a disaster movie poster, calling it Cascade of Doom. Another sent out a picture of their toddler peacefully napping next to the pool with the caption, "Apparently my kid has been sleeping through apocalyptic noise pollution." The smear campaign wasn't just failing, it was making the HOA look ridiculous. That evening, I received 5 new violation notices taped to my front door, because apparently they had decided to stack the charges like I was some kind of waterfall kingpin. There was a notice for unauthorized use of natural stone, as if rocks needed paperwork. Another for unauthorized installation of multi-level landscaping, because the waterfall technically had a 2-tiered design. They even hit me with excessive decorative lighting because I had installed soft underwater LED lights to illuminate the falls at night. Lights the kids called the magic glow. The most ridiculous violation of all accused me of operating an unpermitted water attraction, wording it like I was running a bootleg water park out of my backyard. But instead of scaring me, all they did was arm me with proof of harassment, selective enforcement, and sheer absurdity. I scanned every violation, attached them to a follow-up email to the whole neighborhood, and titled it "What Happens When You Build Something Beautiful." I invited every resident to stop by my yard that weekend to see the waterfall up close and decide for themselves whether it was a nuisance or a masterpiece. That Saturday, half the block showed up with lawn chairs, snacks, and pool floats, turning my backyard into an impromptu neighborhood oasis. The kids played under the falls, the adults took turns posing for selfies in front of it, and one neighbor even brought over a Bluetooth speaker playing a playlist called Waterfall Vibes. Nobody saw a problem, they saw a gathering place, a place that made our cookie-cutter block feel like a vacation spot. That night, after the last family left, I walked out to the waterfall, beer in hand, and switched on the underwater lights. The soft glow lit up the cascading water like liquid gold, and I thought to myself, this is what the HOA will never understand. They see rules. We see life. The waterfall wasn't just staying, it was becoming a monument to what happens when neighbors choose each other over pointless authority. The HOA had tried to drown me in violations, but they were the ones sinking and the water was just starting to rise. After the failed smear campaign and the neighborhood's full embrace of my waterfall, the HOA should have seen the writing on the wall and backed off, but people like that don't know how to quit while they're behind. Instead of accepting reality, they escalated even further, sending me a certified letter announcing that I was being fined $200 a day until the waterfall was removed and that they had started legal proceedings to enforce compliance through the courts. What they didn't realize was that all they had done was hand me the perfect excuse to start digging into their own operations, because if they wanted to drag me into court, I was going to drag their entire history along for the ride. I immediately filed a formal request for all HOA financial records, meeting minutes and documentation related to community improvement spending, everything they had ever touched, approved, or paid for using homeowner dues. Legally, they were required to provide it within 10 business days, but it took them nearly a month, and when they finally handed it over, it was such a sloppy mess of incomplete spreadsheets, shady reimbursements, and handwritten notes that I knew instantly something wasn't right. What I found was exactly what I suspected. The HOA had been quietly siphoning off funds for years under the cover of vague categories like consulting fees and administrative costs, all while issuing inflated fines to homeowners for nonsense violations to refill their slush fund. The HOA president himself had signed off on a $14,000 landscaping project that was paid directly to his cousin's company, a company that existed on paper but hadn't done any actual landscaping in over 3 years. Pearl Necklace Woman, who had been one of the loudest voices demanding my waterfall's removal, had also quietly approved thousands in community event planning expenses, which turned out to be payments for catered meals served exclusively at private HOA board dinners. Even the legal fees they were using to threaten me were inflated. They had hired a law firm run by the HOA vice president's old college roommate, paying double the standard rate for boilerplate letters they could have written themselves. I compiled everything into a massive folder. I labeled the real violations and made copies for every homeowner on the street, delivering them door to door with a cover letter titled "Why Your Dues Keep Going Up." Then, to make sure the story couldn't be buried, I invited every resident to a waterfall-side town hall in my backyard, where I walked them through the entire report, using a projector to show every shady transaction, every sketchy payment, and every conflict of interest. The reaction was instant and volcanic. People were furious not just about the money, but about the fact that the same board who screamed about rules and community standards had been quietly looting the neighborhood the whole time. The HOA president tried to interrupt, claiming it was all a smear campaign, until someone in the crowd shouted, "Then explain the landscaping money." He had no answer. Another neighbor held up a copy of one of the fines they had paid for leaving their garbage can out for an extra hour and demanded to know where that money went. The answer, as everyone now knew, was straight into the HOA's pockets. Before the meeting even ended, the neighborhood voted on the spot to hold a formal recall election, and by the next morning, every single member of the HOA board had resigned in disgrace. With the HOA effectively dissolved, the neighborhood had to decide what to do next, and that's when the waterfall came into play. One of the neighbors stood up and said, "Why don't we use this place for our meetings from now on? It's nicer than the clubhouse and nobody trusts that place anymore." The idea caught on immediately. The waterfall, once called an unapproved nuisance, was now being officially declared the new heart of the neighborhood. I installed a big wooden sign next to it that read "The Falls, Community Gathering Spot," and from that day forward, every neighborhood decision was made right there in the open with no board members hiding behind closed doors. The same waterfall the HOA tried to destroy became the place where the neighborhood rebuilt itself into something better, something fair, something based on actual conversations between neighbors instead of threats and fines. Without the HOA's constant interference, the neighborhood blossomed. People painted their houses however they wanted, built the projects they had always dreamed of, and started hosting block parties that felt more like festivals. The street that was once a beige prison became a living, breathing community, and the waterfall was at the center of it all. The symbol of how we washed away the worst parts of suburban life and replaced them with something real. Local news even picked up the story, running a piece called "The Waterfall That Drowned the HOA," complete with footage of kids jumping through the falls and adults toasting beers beside it. The HOA thought they could drown me in paperwork, but in the end it was my waterfall that drowned them. All it took was one stubborn homeowner, one beautiful backyard feature, and a neighborhood tired of being told how to live. The waterfall wasn't just staying, it was becoming legendary. With the HOA wiped off the map and the neighborhood fully embracing its new self-governed era, the waterfall took on a whole new meaning. What started as my personal backyard upgrade was now a shared landmark, a symbol of the day the residents took back control from the clipboard tyrants who had spent years pretending they knew what was best for everyone. It became a tradition. Every new homeowner who moved onto the street was officially welcomed at the falls, where they were told the whole wild story of the HOA war, from the first violation notice to the final resignation. Kids who had once only seen their neighbors through car windows now spent entire weekends splashing in the pool, challenging each other to see who could jump through the waterfall the best, creating tricks they gave names like the triple twister and the waterfall barrel roll. The adults started using it too: quiet mornings with coffee on the deck, neighborhood book clubs meeting beside the water, and even the occasional wine night where the waterfall became the backdrop for slightly tipsy philosophical debates. What used to be a block of strangers tied together by rules became a community bound together by choice, and all of it traced back to the day the HOA tried to kill the falls and failed spectacularly. Without the threat of fines, people actually got creative with their homes. Front yards transformed into quirky gardens, colorful murals appeared on garage doors, and one guy even built a koi pond shaped like a giant footprint just because he felt like it. Nobody asked permission. Nobody filed a form. And somehow the world didn't end. Instead of meetings ruled by power-hungry board members, decisions were made beside the waterfall, with everyone standing in a circle, sharing ideas and voting right there on the spot. The clubhouse, once a symbol of bureaucratic nonsense, was eventually repurposed into a free lending library and a game room for the neighborhood kids. Even holidays changed. Halloween became a full-street production, with my waterfall glowing bright orange and transformed into the entryway to the haunted lagoon, where kids would dive for candy beneath the falls. Christmas became a light show, with the waterfall turning icy blue and serving as the centerpiece for a floating holiday market held entirely in backyard pools. The very thing the HOA claimed would destroy property values ended up raising them. Real estate agents started calling our street the Falls District and used the story of our neighborhood rebellion as a selling point. People didn't want to live in sterile, over-regulated communities anymore. They wanted life. They wanted fun. They wanted freedom. And our street had all of it, with the falls standing tall in the center like a glowing, cascading monument to the day the neighborhood chose fun over fear. The story even made its way into local schools, where one of the teachers who lived on our block used it as a class project on community activism, assigning students to write essays on how they would improve their own neighborhoods if they didn't need anyone's permission. The HOA's former leadership vanished into history, their names reduced to punchlines we joked about whenever someone considered putting up a rule sign for anything. Pearl Necklace Woman became a suburban myth, the type of story we told new families over s'mores at pool parties, a cautionary tale about what happens when you try to fight joy with paperwork. And me? I still sit beside the waterfall almost every night, beer in hand, lights glowing, water cascading, and I think about how none of this would have happened if I hadn't decided my backyard deserved something beautiful. The HOA said I couldn't have a waterfall in my pool. Now the waterfall is the heart of the neighborhood. It is where we gather. It is where we celebrate. It is where we remember that rules don't build communities, people do. And if anyone ever tries to take that away from us again, they better know how to swim.